so let's have a look at where we finished last time. So we were touching last time on this section called He Who Sees, Sees. So the phenomenon of the macrocosm and microcosm should provide adequate material for a seeker to meaningfully launch on the study and inquiry of the transcendental reality beyond the terrestrial world. However, the recognition of the reality would depend upon one's spiritual acumen. So we went through this analysis of the macrocosm and the microcosm, looking at the beautiful systems, the cause and effect relationships that govern the entire macrocosm. We looked at that all-pervading sense of I am, which is the axle around which the microcosm functions, and began to sense that there's this unknown something behind everything. And he says the phenomenon of the macrocosm and microcosm should provide enough material to launch you on your study and inquiry. So it doesn't prove anything, but it gives you enough material to say, I need to investigate further, because I can sense that there is something behind all of this, something greater than the reality that I see in front of me. But he said the recognition of what that is depends upon your spiritual acumen. So we were touching last time on this idea that one person gets that sense of wonderment, that sense of radical amazement, that, oh my God, that ascharya is the phrase that's used in Sanskrit, when they peel a banana, something that they do every day. That indicates a high degree of spiritual acumen. There's that consistent awareness. Now imagine if you had a banana every day for lunch. Every day you peel the banana, you eat it, you discard the skin. There's no sense of wonderment. There's no sense of, oh my God, what is this thing? How did it get created? High degree of spiritual acumen means that you are consistently aware of that. Another person gets that sense of wonderment when they see a beautiful sunset. It's a more overt expression of that divinity. Another person sees it when they go and visit Niagara Falls. It's a much more overt expression again. So, what's the degree of expression that you need in order to get that sense of ascharya, that sense of wonderment? The more sensitive you are to the world around you and getting that sense of childlike wonder indicates, as he says here, the higher degree of spiritual acumen. So, we have launched on this study. So, if that section was entitled He Who Sees, Sees. He follows on from that and said, ignoramuses see not. He says, the ignorant masses fail to perceive the unknown hand behind the impeccable laws of nature set in motion. In ignorance, their ego asserts its own views on God. These irrational thoughts of God, prevalent the world over, have been brought out by John Godfrey Saxe in his beautiful poem, The Blind Men and the Elephant. Okay, so those who do perceive something behind the surface, those who don't. And he says for those who don't, what happens is that because we are failing to perceive the totality, we nonetheless create something. Now, we'll touch here on what we were saying in the last class. This is true for a certain class of individuals. Okay, obviously the atheist doesn't do this. There's no sense of a God for the atheist. There are others who are more philosophically inclined who don't do this. Hopefully the likes of us. But he says for a certain class of individuals, what happens is that we fail to perceive that unknown hand in its totality. So it's not that there's nothing perceived at all, because he says we turn it into some vision of God, but we fail to see the totality of it we only get a sliver or a glimpse. And what we do with whatever that glimpse is, we turn that into the whole. So this is known as tamasic intellect. I won't go too much into that, that's just a label for it. We do this in all areas of life. So you have a person whom you know, and they act a particular way towards you once, and you use that single action as a way of characterizing their entire personality. Or you see a particular person acting in a way, and you characterize that whole group, their entire gender, their entire race, their entire generation. You know what millennials are like? They're like this. Why? Well, because their son or daughter is that way, or because one of their workers is that way. So characterizing the whole based upon a part is known as tamasic intellect, and it's a weakness that we will share in various degrees in different areas of life. And of course, the area of religion is no exception. And that's what the poem, The Blind Man and the Elephant, is exactly talking about. So let's go through the poem and have a quick look. It was 6 men of Indostan to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl, God bless me, but the elephant is nothing but a wall. The second, feeling of the tusk, cried, Ho, what have we here? So very round and smooth and sharp, to me 'tis mighty clear, this wonder of an elephant is very like a spear. The third approached the animal, and, happening to take the squirming trunk within his hands, thus boldly up and spake, I see, quoth he, the elephant is very like a snake. The fourth reached out his eager hand, and felt about the knee, what most this wondrous beast is like is mighty plain, quoth he, 'tis clear enough the elephant is very like a tree. The fifth, who chanced to touch the air, said, even the blindest man can tell what this resembles most, deny the fact who can, this marvel of an elephant is very like a fan. The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope, than seizing on the swinging tail that fell within his scope, I see, quoth he, the elephant is very like a rope. And so these men of Indostan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion exceeding stiff and strong, though each was partly in the right, and all were in the wrong. So oft in theologic wars the disputants, I ween, rail on in utter ignorance of what each other mean, and prate about an elephant not one of them has seen. So, what's happening in religion? There is a discussion of God, and each religion or religious tradition has described or defined one aspect of it. And in fact, the 6 men of Indostan here is a reference to the 6 main philosophical traditions of India, of which Vedanta is one. So the different religions have a glimpse of the transcendental reality. They take that glimpse and they build an entire religious tradition around one dimension. So I'm not a student of religions per se, so someone else will correct me if I'm wrong, or others will have much more accurate views on this, but you take a look at the different religions and what do you see? You see a real strong theme. So Catholicism, very strong on hierarchies, on the confession side of things. You take a look at Islam. The word Islam means submission. So there is the surrender aspect. Buddhism has a strong theme of compassion for beings. The Bodhisattva is an enlightened being who returns to earth just to help us out. So you take a different theme and you build something around it. point that he's making here is that we fail to recognize that all we've done is grasp a small aspect of it, and we're trying to define something much larger than that. So there's no problem in doing that. There's no problem in trying to define based on a small amount of information, as long as we know that that's what we're doing. In the Bhagavad-Gita, the key component, or I should say, in the Bhagavad-Gita, the first quality of a person endowed with knowledge or insight is humility. He gives 20 qualities of a person who has spiritual knowledge, and the first of them is humility. So humility is to recognize the areas of our ignorance, to know where the boundary of what we know lies, so that we stay in our lane. Not only that, but it stops us from having a sense of antagonism or discord towards others who have different opinions. I know that I'm partly in the right, and I know that I'm also in the wrong. So someone with a different opinion, I can accommodate them. So I've gone into this in more detail in another one of the classes that I took. So if you are interested, the short link is there. Any queries to the blind men and the elephant? He says, Vedanta gives no such names to God as these blind men did to the elephant. The Vedantic approach to God is systematic. Provides you the philosophy to study, contemplate, assimilate, and apply it to your spiritual evolution, and reach the ultimate state of self-realization, God-realization. So this is one of the differences between religion and philosophy. To join a religion, or to be part of a religion, there are articles of faith. An article of faith is something that you pretty much have to believe in order to be part of that religion. Let me get that link. Oh, I've just opened it up. That's not what I want to do. I'll type it in at the end. In order to be part of that religion, you need to accept those articles of faith. So in the Christian faith, for example, Jesus is the incarnation of God, came to earth, died and resurrected. If you deny those aspects, you can still call yourself a religion. No one's going to. You can still call yourself a Christian. No one's going to stop you. But by and large, the Christian faith are those who accept that. Philosophy is very different. In philosophy, nothing needs to be accepted. You don't need to be ideologically committed to anything. I can remember a number of years ago describing the theory of reincarnation in one context or another. And this is during one of the classes. And someone asked me some question around it. I can't remember exactly what it was. And my response was, well, I personally don't believe in reincarnation. And for the rest of the class, I absolutely couldn't concentrate. In fact, for the couple of classes after, it really shook the person. Because here's someone, myself, who'd spent 8 years living in India and was now out teaching the same philosophy and didn't ascribe to one of sort of the key tenets, which is this theory of reincarnation. So it indicated a very religious sort of mindset, that if you are part of the philosophy, if you're part of the group, then you clearly toe the line ideologically. So it was a really nice lesson. Vedanta gives no such names to God. In fact, Vedanta is very clear on saying that we don't know what it is. And we were touching on this last week. God is something to be derived. And deriving it doesn't mean coming up with an answer in your brain. It's not a cognitive answer. Deriving it means becoming it, which we'll get to in a moment. So, in that's where he moves on now to chapter 2. Chapter 2 describes the nature of God. So, having said that it's something that cannot be understood, we're now going to say we're going to describe the nature of God. So it's not contradictory, it's very much following on from what we just said, that there's an elephant that we just can't see. So we're going to describe the tusk and the foot and the side and the tail and the trunk and the ear and whatever else we can figure out about it. And in those descriptions, what do? We put them all together as best we can and come up with some conception of God, knowing full well that that conception is false, or at least only partially true. The point is not to have a perfect conception of what God is. The point is to give a direction of attention for the mind. Our attention is always on some trajectory. It's moving towards something with a specific velocity, say. What's our mind going towards? So we don't feel it in the same way that our physical body is on a trajectory hurtling through space, but we don't feel it. I feel like I'm sitting still. Similarly with the mind, it's moving towards something. What's it moving towards? So when it comes to moving it towards God, it's an incredibly difficult task because it is unknown. So we need to give ourselves these intellectual footholds so that we can choose to place our attention in the right direction. As he says, towards self-realization or God-realization. So he starts by saying, God is one. He says, the one being, the pure consciousness, manifests as infinite beings, plants, animals, and humans. A phenomenon akin to the one sun above, seen in several reflections below. A dewdrop has a reflected sun within. So does the lake, the ocean, and the endless reflecting media. Thus, the sun is one, but the reflections are numberless. They appear and disappear. So too, the one pure consciousness manifests as the infinite variety of conditioned consciousness, living beings which are born and die, while the consciousness remains eternally. So as we're going to get to later on in this chapter, all of these ideas are pointers. Is it true to say that God is one? That God is this undivided consciousness? It's neither true nor untrue, but it has some truth to it. There's something that we can get from that characterization of God as one. To imply that God is one is to say that it has a boundary around it. Well, what's on the other side of that boundary? Okay, so one has something to it that we can use to create a formulation to hold on to. But if we hold on to it too tightly, then we're holding on to the false. So they're signposts, they're pointers, they're not truths, they're not descriptions. So as he touched on in The Blind Man and the Elephant, different theological traditions, different versions of God, with different names, forms, qualities and characteristics. So Vedanta talks about God as the reality, as consciousness and as pure being. So it's the same thing, but taken from different angles. So when we talk about the reality, it's the basis of the universe. So it's looking at it from a macrocosmic perspective. Look around us. We see the objects and the plants and the landscapes and the skies and everything else around us. What's the basis for it? Even in physics, there was the search for the so-called God particle, the most fundamental unit of matter out of which everything else is made. From the perspective of the microcosm, the individual. It's known as consciousness. It's the very basis of your experience. We'll get into this as we go through. All of your experiences are conscious of something. Conscious of the sound and the smell and the taste, conscious of your feelings, conscious of the thoughts, conscious of your intentions, at least hopefully sometimes. What's the basis for these units of experience in which I'm always conscious of something? And we touched on this again last week. You can introspect. You can look at your current experience and become aware that you are having it. I can hear that sound. I'm conscious of that sound. Oh, now I know that I'm conscious of that sound. I'm aware of being aware of that sound. And from there you can pull out, you can tease apart a sense of awareness per se. The objects are still there, but there's a sense in which awareness has been, if you like, abstracted from the experience, and it's now pointing towards a consciousness per se. And it's described as pure being. I am whatever I consider myself to be. You are whatever you consider yourself to be. There are animals, they exist, they are. Plants, they exist, they are. There is an individual being there. The idea of pure being is again to abstract something from that. What's another way of thinking about this? You have a tree. The tree is. The tree exists. Chop the tree down, slice it up into planks, and turn it into a table. The tree no longer is, but the table is. You take that table and you set fire to it, burn it to the ground. The table no longer is, but the pile of ash is. So tree, table, ash. Tree is not the table is not the ash. But what's common? What's the common thread through all three of those transactions? Through all three of those changes? There's an isness. There's a being. What is that being? What does it mean to be something? And where does one's beingness come from? So again, the idea, as he touched on in that paragraph, is to look beyond the surface. What is it that imparts the qualities that we observe in the phenomenal world? Where do those qualities and properties come from? And of course the analogy he gives here is of the sun and its reflections. So you have the singular sun above. Anywhere there is a reflecting medium, you get a reflected sun, of course. Go for a walk in the morning and hanging off a cobweb, hundreds of dewdrops, and in each of those dewdrops is a sun. The sun above is the real one. Are those reflected suns, are they real? Well, you can't say that they're the real sun, obviously. They're the reflected sun, but they're not unreal either. They actually are there. You're seeing them. You have the real sun and the reflected sun. The sun is permanent, relatively. It persists. But by 10:30 in the morning, those dewdrops have burnt off and the reflected suns have gone with it. So what's the relevance here? The reflected sun is your individuality, your being. Are you real? Well, of course I'm real. I'm perceiving myself. Where does your consciousness come from? Vedanta describes a reflecting medium. Your body, your mind, your intellect. There is a consciousness somewhere, the one sun. Consciousness reflects in those media and gives rise to a reflected consciousness. There is a pure I am, or a pure self, gets reflected through the media and becomes this particular I am. I am Glenn. This is myself. So all of these pointers that are given are ways of looking at an underlying source, something that is more real, more permanent. It's not defined to disparage, if you like, or to dismiss what you are and what you are experiencing yourself as. Rather, it's put in place to make us realize that we are so much more than that. I am this body, mind, and intellect. I am this individuality, this ego. But I'm so much more than that. I'm also the underlying consciousness which gives rise to the ego. So in some philosophical and religious traditions, the attempt to grow out of the limited identity of just this body, mind, and intellect can become a sort of suppression of that individuality. It's seen as distasteful, unpleasant, something to be discarded, which is a legitimate attitude as long as it's balanced with growing into something larger. There's nothing wrong with a teenager wanting to shed her childhood, as long as it's being done in the service of growing into something more mature. If we're trying to shed our childhood because there's something distasteful about it, it's a suppression. The same thing can happen in the spiritual realm. So that's why these analogies are given in glowing terms. God is one. And we'll get through some more of them. But you look at these terms and they're very noble in their description, uplifting. So the other analogy that's used is that of a drop of water. So the substratum of the microcosm and the substratum of the macrocosm are one. So God is one. It becomes the microcosm, the individual. It becomes the macrocosm. Microcosm, again, yourself, just the individual. Macrocosm you can think of as the totality of all individuals, of all beings. Now, if you understand a single drop of ocean water, take one drop out, analyze it, you know it, you know the entire ocean. When you discover that drop that you took out is salty water, you know now that the whole ocean is salty water. In a similar way, what you most intimately have access to is your own consciousness, is your own awareness, your present moment lived experience. Most of us don't pay attention to it. We are slightly in the past or slightly in the future, striving for the next thing or lamenting the last thing. When we are in the present moment with that keen awareness, we can start to see who and what we are. So if you seek the truth or the reality of who and what you are as an individual, you've understood that drop of consciousness. When you've understood that drop of consciousness that lies within you, you've understood it for the totality, for the macrocosm. And so earlier on in the text, there were these two ideas. Self is God. That's what this is referring to, this idea that when you can understand, or when you understand is the wrong word, I'm using it sort of in inverted commas here, because it's not a cognitive understanding, but when you grasp intuitively the nature of your consciousness, you've understood the nature of every consciousness. Your self is the substratum. The consciousness is one. The consciousness that gives rise to your experience is the same consciousness that gives rise to my own. So when you've understood yours, you understand me. There is a sense of oneness. And so the idea self is God, or the self is divinity, the idea that the substratum of the microcosm is that of the macrocosm, gives us a direction of attention again. Where do I search for it? Okay, I want to search for God. How? Where? What do I do? Direct your attention inwardly. Trace back to a more underlying source of your experience. And this starts off in a psychological way. I'm afraid of dogs. Why am I afraid of dogs? Go back to the source. When I was 6 years old, I was attacked by the neighbour's dog. Ever since then, I've been terrified. It's an underlying source. Okay, but what's the mechanism by which I'm capable of being afraid of anything? What's the mechanism by which I can experience anything? Why am I here? What does it mean to be here? You're looking inwardly to answer these questions. We start by getting information from outside of ourselves, and we take that information and we use it as a guide for the direction of our attention. Any clarifications to anything we've covered up to this point? Yeah, so I'll briefly touch on the analogy again. You can imagine a teenager who is wanting to dismiss or push away a particular trait that she has, because she sees that it's sort of a bit of a hangover from when she was 10, 11, 12 years old. So now, think of that as being neither good nor bad. It depends upon what motivates it. On the positive side, if it's being motivated by seeing that she wants to grow into more maturity, then you can think of it as positive, because it's like a caterpillar shedding its skin. That's not the right one. It's not the right analogy. You think of a snake shedding its skin. It's getting rid of the old and growing into the new. So it's a positive thing because it's going in the direction of growth and maturity. The same thing could happen. Let's say that she's observed an older relative dismissing the same quality. Oh, that's childish. That's so stupid. She doesn't have a conception of maturity that she's going towards. She just recognizes, oh, I do that. I should stop doing that. I won't do that anymore. So she suppresses what is still part of her personality, that childish attitude and those childish behaviors, but isn't growing towards something better or more mature. She doesn't have a conception of that direction of growth. In the first example, she's seen her older sister. She wants to be like her older sister, so she's growing up. In the second example, she's just suppressing or denying who and what she is, because she's taken on the perspective of an adult. Okay, so I hope that's relatively clearish. It's not perfect, but it works enough. So now in the spiritual domain, the same thing happens. We hear from people whom we respect, authors, speakers, teachers, mentors, gurus. We hear about the detrimental aspects of the ego: selfish grasping, exaggerated value for the petty things in life, limited perspective on the world, discord in relationships, and so on and so forth. Okay, we see what we call spiritual immaturity, and we recognize it within ourselves. We can attempt to deny or suppress or push away those elements of the ego, similarly with either a positive intention or a negative intention. The positive intention is to say, yeah, this is what immaturity is. Now that is what maturity looks like. And so you've developed a conception of what a more mature spiritual self is like. And so as you are pushing away or shedding spiritual immaturity, at the same time you've recognized that this is in the service of growing into greater spiritual maturity. And so that energy, if you like, of your ego, which is trying to force its way into your awareness, is being directed towards your spiritual goal, your spiritual aspirations. So it's positive, it's healthy. But often what happens in spiritual, philosophical, religious traditions is that we easily recognize how the ego functions, but it's much more difficult for us to have a clear conception of spiritual maturity. And so what we're doing is we start to deny or inhibit our selfishness without taking ourselves, without connecting ourselves to a higher spiritual maturity. And this is especially important because it's much easier to intellectually understand spiritual maturity. A spiritually mature person is compassionate. I know what compassion is. Compassion is, and you rattle it off. Being able to intellectually understand it is not the same as having it as a goal. Having it as a goal means that you feel intrinsically motivated to become it. So you can list out all 60 odd qualities that appear in the Bhagavad-Gita that describe spiritual maturity, but it's just information for you. It's not an intrinsically motivating ideal that activates you, that inspires you, and that gets your awareness moving, so that when you start to deny or to inhibit your ego, you're also going somewhere else. And so that's why these pointers are so important, because we need to integrate them and fold them into our spiritual ideal, so that as we are negating the lower, we are also asserting the higher. If we negate without the assertion, we're suppressing ourselves. And it's very easy to do. So it's one of the potholes on the road. Well, it's actually kind of a big ditch that you can fall into, but so the first thing is to, again, start with humility and say, I'm not necessarily going to have full access to my intentions, so I should be a little careful. But the best you can do for yourself is to be aware of this particular phenomenon, And then ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why am I engaging in this way? Let us say I'm inhibiting an ego-centric behavior. What you can do is ask, what's the ego getting out of this? Okay, I'm going to inhibit this particular spiritually immature behavior. What might the ego be getting out of it? I'd like to think it's a spiritual impulse, but maybe the ego is getting something out of it too. Just be aware and list out a couple of things. You don't have to be accurate. Just become aware that it can be an ego-driven activity. The other thing to do is to check the way that it feels. If you are inhibiting the lower and at the same time you are inspired towards the higher, it feels a certain way. When you know that you are moving towards some spiritual maturity, there's a sense of being intrinsically motivated. It feels good. So cognitively, you've got a sense of the thing you're moving towards. You can describe it. When it comes to my relationships, I always have to be right. Better spiritual maturity is to accept others. You can describe it for yourself. When you are moving towards that, you feel good about the whole thing. So checking the way that it feels in the moment. There's a sense of motivation that is inspiring, that feels liberating. You actually feel a sense of expansion, perhaps. It'll be different for everybody, but you'll recognize it when you see it. Especially if you can retrospectively look. You can recognize times where that was genuinely me growing. That period that I went through when I moved out of home, or when I did this or that or the other, I look back now, I can see that was a period of genuine growth. And I know what it felt like. I know what it felt like to be motivated towards the higher. So you're looking for that again. The other aspect is the effect. If we are suppressing, there'll be an effect on the personality. The way that we relate to others will be closed off, judgmental, harsh, ungentle. These sorts of elements come into the personality. We're agitated, self-critical. How do you feel about yourself? Can you look in the mirror and say, I like you? Or is that's too much, it's horrible, I can't do that, that's weird. What's the relationship that you have to the world and to yourself? The problem with this is that we can be in that state for a while and not recognize it. But again, the point is to ask the question. And if you ask the question, you start to look, how do I feel about my life? What are my relationships like? How do I feel about myself? Answer them as honestly as you can. Sure. Yeah. I would do neither of those. So don't go off ego and don't force yourself. What I would say is reassess your goal. Because you put it really nicely, which is you're not ready for it yet. You're ready for it intellectually, but your level of maturity is not ready. So what you can think of is happening in that case is that you're here and the goal you've set is here. It's too much of a stretch. Chop it down to here. What would it look like to move the needle half a degree in that direction? Because at the moment I'm looking to go from here to here. You know, I'm trying to do a 90-degree shift. It's too much. What's 1 degree? So you change the goal so that it's the same direction as the earlier one that you had envisaged, but it's just a much smaller step along the way. And this is much more sustainable. It also supports the need that we have for competence. So this is one of the universal psychological needs that we share as human beings, is the need for competence, autonomy and relatedness to others. So when we feel that we are moving in the right direction, that we're growing in our capacities, we are inspired to do more. Again, it feels good. But if the goal that we've set for ourselves is too tough, we can force ourselves to try and move in that direction, but it's going to be a suppression. Nor are we going to feel good about it, because we're going to fail at it maybe 80% of the time. So a good rule of thumb might be to give yourself goals that you can achieve 90% of the time. And this is, again, especially for those who are intellectually inclined, it's easy to overset the goals. Self-realization, I like the sound of that. Let's do that. All right? Okay. By all means, set it. But at the same time, have intermediate goals that allow you to move in that direction. Okay, the next aspect or description that he gives is Sakshi, witness. He says God's state of being is also referred to as Sakshi, which means a detached, disinterested witness. The consciousness is responsible for perception and action of the body, feelings and emotions of the mind, and thoughts and ideas of the intellect. But it remains a silent witness of them all. It claims no connection, nor is it involved in the activities of the body, mind, and intellect. It remains a perfect witness, Sakshi. So there are a few words where the Sanskrit is retained because there is a loss of the translation into English. Sakshi is one of them. So he calls it in the text a detached, disinterested witness. So it's important that we understand what this does not refer to. It's not referring to perception, cognition, emotion, or intention. So again, if we take this idea of being detached and disinterested and turn it into, say, a cognitive or emotional state, then you can get a sense of being dissociated. So things are going on around you, I don't care. What's your opinion of it? I don't have an opinion. I'm a detached, disinterested witness. So you're not engaged with yourself, you're not engaged in the world. And this again is a way of what we can call spiritual bypassing. The engagement with the world is tough. Maintaining positive relationships, romantic, family, social, work, it's difficult, it's not easy. Showing up every day in a particular activity and following through, it's not easy. And so I might just not engage at all. That might be a good solution. But that seems a bit like laziness. Let me take this idea, witness, detached, disinterested witness. Put that on top, and now it's okay. So I'm not engaging in the world of work and drawing wealth out of the world. I'm not engaging in the romantic world or the family world. Why not? I'm a detached, disinterested witness. Now really I'm afraid, but I'm using a spiritual idea to justify the action. So it's not referring to what your body, mind and intellect are doing. They must continue to engage according to their nature. Instead, it's talking about, again, this idea of an underlying consciousness per se. So the word witness, or the word sakshi, has two aspects to it. It is responsible for but untouched by. Responsible for what? Action, perception, emotion, and thought. So action, perception, emotion, and thought are all experiences. You're always conscious of. When you say you're acting, what you're saying is, I'm aware that I'm acting. So the underlying consciousness is responsible for your experience. At the same time, it's untouched by it. It's not affected by it. Whatever your emotional state is, whatever your set of values and ideas are, whatever behavior you engage in, there's an aspect of your experience which is not perceiving, it's not feeling, and it's not thinking. It's not doing any of that stuff, nor is it changed or affected by it. And yet it's ever present. It is the space in which all of this takes place. There's a fairly old song, and the key refrain is, where is my mind? Where is your mind? Okay, your body exists in the space of the world that you see around you, fairly easy. Where does your mind exist? What does it exist in? Your inner experience, the totality of what you go through. What does it exist in? What's the space in which it exists that allows it to play in the way that it does? So no matter what happens to my body, the space is unaffected. Space is just space. No matter what happens to this world, no matter what happens to, the solar system, space is space. The consciousness has that quality. It permits the play of action, perception, emotion, and thought, but remains unaffected by it. So, interesting idea, but again, what does it mean in terms of a direction? It is that pure sense of I am. So once again, you can introspect. Today I am happy, yesterday I was sad. I am happy, I am sad. Happy and sad are different. If you like, they're opposites, or at least different points on the spectrum. The I am isn't different from one experience to the next. It's not changed. Can you tease out that unchanging portion of I am? And once you've grasped it, practice holding on to it. Again, it's not a desperate clinging. Okay, then it becomes a suppression again. It's a gentle awareness. The next aspect he touches on is unconditioned consciousness. So you can see the flow of attention here, the flow of ideas. God is referred to as a homogeneous mass of pure consciousness. Yet the consciousness appears conditioned by the material equipments. Functioning through the body, mind, and intellect, it becomes the conditioned consciousness, the human being. So this is a way to visualize what you are. What am I? Because we're so embedded, so involved in our experience, we need a way to take a step back and to look at ourselves rather than simply looking through yourself. When you look through yourself, then you don't see what it is that's doing the looking. These ideas give us a way to intellectually step out and look at what we are. So the analogy that has been used in the past in one of the other texts is that of a prism. You have pure, unconditioned white light coming in. it strikes the prism and it exits as the rainbow. So you can say that the unconditioned light is conditioned by the prism and becomes coloured light. So the individual that each one of us is the rainbow. What am I experiencing right now as myself? It's a rainbow. It is a conditioned form of consciousness. What's it conditioned by? Okay, the material equipments, which we can go into. Well, what's being conditioned? Well, the unconditioned consciousness. What is that unconditioned consciousness? Good question. That is to be derived. So the conditioning bodies can be described in different ways. In this portion of the text, he describes the gross body, the subtle body, and the causal body. So the gross body, the thing you see in the mirror. When the consciousness functions through the gross body, we are in the waking state of consciousness, as we are now. Subtler than that is the subtle body. The subtle body is the home of the mind and the intellect. It's our emotion, our desires, our thoughts, our wisdom. When the consciousness functions through the subtle body, but doesn't go into the gross body, or doesn't go through the gross body, we're in the state of dream. Subtler again is the causal body. So these are our dormant characteristics, or the phrase in Sanskrit is vasanas. How can we understand the vasanas? So when the consciousness functions through the causal body, we are in the deep sleep state. Where is your personality in deep sleep? Well, it's not anywhere. It doesn't exist. If you turn your phone off, where is the ringtone? Where is the glowing apps? Well, they're not anywhere. They don't exist. But the moment the alarm goes off and you wake up, you express yourself as that individual who went to sleep. Same person. You haven't changed. You're still who you are. But in that period of deep sleep, there was no personality. So if you think of it that way, then there is a continuity of the potential of your personality in some form. And then when the consciousness gets you waking up again, those dormant tendencies spring to the surface and you become yourself. So the vasanas, the causal body, are the dormant tendencies of your personality. These are the conditioning bodies. Yeah. Yep, I've seen samskara and vasanas being used interchangeably. The main difference between samskara and vasana is, I think, is just a particular angle or way of looking at it. Samskara are thought of as, if you like, almost like complexes from a psychological perspective. A guy, he's got a mother complex, or he's got a Christ complex. Samskaras are thought of as scars or distortions that need to be worked out. But it's the same fundamental idea, which is that you have an underlying cause that gives rise to a personality, and the same attitude towards them is held with regards to spirituality, which is that spiritual growth means the transcending and the removal of vasanas, the transcending and removal of samskara. So yeah. As far as where they come from, vasanas are the effect of our prior actions. So anytime you engage in an action, prior to engaging in the action you had a desire. I want that thing, so I perform the action. Prior to it being a desire, it's just a thought, just a single idea that has been repeated over and over and over again to become a desire. Prior to it becoming a thought, what was it? Well, this idea of vasana is presented there. So a vasana becomes a thought that repeats and consolidates into a desire, and then the desire reaches a tipping point and it goes into action. When we perform an action, we are linking ourselves right the way back to that vasana. And so if you like, we are laying down those tracks once again every time we perform an action. So this is why our intention is so important. It's the intention that underlies our action that we are relaying down as a vasana. So the analogy that we often give is that of a seed. In fact, the causal body is often called the seed body. Seed gives rise to a sapling, gives rise to a tree, gives rise to the fruit. The fruit contains within it more seeds for the same, and so you get this chronology of action. Vasana, thought, desire, action, vasana. So our vasanas are created by our past actions. Well, what about those prior vasanas? Prior past actions. Well, what about those ones? Prior past actions. And we go on infinitely. Where did the first vasana come from? That's where we have theories of creation, because we don't know. So yeah, there is an infinite regress. It's very much like asking, who are you born from? Oh, your parents. Who are they born from? Well, their parents. You keep going back and you get this infinite regress. So they cut. Yeah, go ahead. Blocking is part of a I'd say blocking is a technique that is part of a larger project of transcending and growing. Again, it depends what you mean by blocking. I'm hesitant. Yeah. So, and again, that's where our spiritual ideal is so important. So you reconnect back to your spiritual ideal, and then whatever action you perform genuinely in the service of that, that's the vasana that you're creating now. So if you have a vasana for growth, you have an action that springs from that, and that's the vasana you're laying down. So you may actually end up performing similar actions to what you used to, but what's changed is the intention. Now, let's say you're the HR manager and you have to hold people to account when they are transgressing the rules. Now, you used to do it because you used to love being in charge and love having a go at people. I like being the boss. I like people being scared of me. That's the intention. Okay, well, that's what you're laying down. That's the personality you're recreating. You have an epiphany. You realize people don't like me. I've got to change things. Now you're doing it in the service of their growth, their development, and the service of the company. Same action, totally different intention. It's much purer. It's done in service of something greater. So yeah, this is why I sort of want to soft peel on the word block, because again, it can be misconstrued as I had to stop that behavior. Now, in some cases, of course, you need to stop the behavior, but it needs to turn into something else. What would that same behavior look like if it was a bit more spiritually mature? What's a slightly more mature way to relate to that same circumstance or to express that behavior? Because you want to be expressing your vasanas and getting rid of them, rather than expressing your vasanas and recreating them. And higher again than having a spiritual goal is to be entirely selfless. So to be selfless means that you have no intention whatsoever. It's just an expression of your nature in an obligatory fashion. You're simply expressing the nature that you have. You're not trying to gain anything from it. This is what I am. So there's no ego involved. There's no craving for future result. It's just a mere expression of your nature. It's a very difficult tightrope to walk, but that's our theory. So it starts with unselfish spiritual ideals and then moves beyond that into selfless. So just to finish off this section here. So he's talking about God then as unconditioned consciousness. Anytime we have an experience, we are conscious of. All of our experiences are perceptions, emotions, and thoughts, broadly speaking. To have an experience is to be conscious of something. So there's always an object of our awareness. Life is dualistic. Subject-object relationship, two things. There's a duality. Again, if you introspect, if you analyze your experiences, I'm always in relation to something. Even when I'm alone in my room reading a book, I'm in relationship to my book. I'm sitting with my eyes closed watching my breath. I'm in relationship to my breath. There's always a subject, always an object. The name of this tradition is Advaita Vedanta. Advaita, non-dual. So the idea of Vedanta philosophy then is to trace back to that unconditioned consciousness, to become it, and to identify with the objectless consciousness. So we've used the word ego once or twice. The ego is that notion that I am the equipments. I am the perceiver, the actor, the feeler, the thinker, the meditator. It's not something we say to ourselves, it's just a tacit assumption. I am the waker. I am the dreamer. I am the deep sleeper. So the ego is the identification of myself with the functioning of the equipments. Spirituality is to take that identity beyond the equipments and to become the space in which the equipments function, the Sakshi, to become the unconditioned self, a self that is not defined by the qualities, properties, form, function of your body, mind, intellect. It's to have non-dual awareness, awareness that has no object associated with it. And so that's why these pointers are important, because it's talking exactly about that. And then the process of spiritual practice gradually removes the ego, thins it out, and in the state of meditation we enter into that state of unconditioned self. Okay, we'll continue with the text next week. Any clarifications or questions to anything before we close off? Okay, thanks folks. Appreciate the attendance and the questions as always. If you have other questions from this throughout the week, please feel free to email them through to me. I can put them up in our Q&A. And of course at the beginning of class is always an option to take up questions as well. Hari Om. Hari Om Sid. I'm very well.